You know, some people don't die when their heart stops beating. They die long before that. Quietly, unnoticed, while still waking up every morning. That man was one of them. He lived alone in a dimly lit apartment on the edge of town. The kind of place where the walls had memorized more silence than sound. He was 46, worked from home, spoke only when spoken to, and even then, it felt like a burden to use words. He had no family, no friends, no visitors, just a small calendar that marked nothing special, and a kettle that whistled more often than his own voice. But that night, something shifted. It was cold, the kind of cold that reminds you you're alive, just enough to hurt. He couldn't sleep again. Tossed, turned, listened to the clock tick like a reminder that time was moving, even if he wasn't. Restless, he got up and walked toward the attic, an old habit whenever sleep refused to come. The attic was nothing but dust and memories. But tonight, his eyes stopped at something he hadn't touched in over a decade. A wooden chest, cracked, heavy, forgotten. He knelt beside it, ran his fingers over the lid, paused, then opened it. Inside, there were papers, some old photos, a few letters. 7 letters, to be exact, all handwritten, all unsent. He picked the first one up. The paper had yellowed, but the ink was still bold. He didn't even need to read the name on it. He knew who it was for. Letter 1, to my mother, the one I never said goodbye to. He took a long breath. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded it. And then he read, Dear Mom, I don't know if this letter will ever find you, but maybe writing it will help me find something of myself. You left too early. I was 17 when you died, and for years I told people I was okay, that I had moved on, that time had healed me. It didn't. I just learned how to smile better. How to cry only when no one was looking. How to say, I'm fine, even when something inside me was screaming. I remember the way you made pancakes every Sunday morning, even when we barely had enough for dinner the night before. The way your fingers smelled like soap and love when you ran them through my hair. But you know what I never told you? That I was scared. Every single day after you died, I was scared. Scared of growing up. Scared of turning into someone you'd be disappointed in. Scared of forgetting your voice. And the worst part is, sometimes I think I already have. I wish I had just one more morning. One more plate of your 2 burnt pancakes. One more hug where I didn't have to be the strong one. But mostly, I wish I had said goodbye. I never did. Love, your son. He folded the letter slowly. You could see it in his eyes, a man unraveling. That wasn't just a letter. That was a wound he'd stitched shut with silence for years. And now it was bleeding again. He sat there for a while, still, quiet, letting the ache settle in like old furniture. Outside, the city was asleep. But inside that attic, the past had woken up, and it wasn't going back to sleep. He stared at the second envelope for a long time before opening it. It was soft at the edges, worn out like it had been read and reread in his mind 100 times, even if never aloud. In the top right corner was a date. He didn't remember writing it, but it was unmistakably his handwriting. March 3rd, 1998. He whispered the date out loud, like tasting an old flavor he hadn't had in years. Then slowly, he opened it, and the letter inside began to whisper truths that time had buried. To the one I waited for. You know what waiting feels like? It's not standing at a bus stop or counting days on a calendar. It's sitting in the dark, holding on to a name like it's the last lit candle in a storm. It's falling asleep to dreams that replay the same scene every night. You walking toward me, smiling, saying, Sorry I'm late. I waited for you. Through winters that never ended and summers that never warmed me. I waited in every crowded room, thinking maybe you were the next laugh I'd hear. I waited in every train station, every passing face, every long pause between heartbeats. And yet, you never came. He sat there, letting the silence settle like dust around him. Then his voice broke the stillness. She was real, you know, he said softly, almost to himself. Not like a fantasy, not like something I made up. She was real, He stood up and walked to the window. The same street below, the same crooked lamppost, and 1,000 memories that never stopped walking past his glass. He had met her in the fall of '97, back when hope still felt like something you could fold up and put in your coat pocket. They met in a bookstore, not the kind with glowing neon signs or coffee shops. No, this one smelled like damp wood, old pages, and forgotten dreams. He was reaching for the same copy of the bell jar when their hands touched. She laughed first. "Great minds think alike," she had said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Or maybe lonely ones," he replied. That's how it started. Their conversations were like quiet rivers, flowing between poetry, silence, and questions neither had answers to. She once told him she didn't believe in soulmates. "I believe in timings," she had said. "Sometimes the right person shows up at the wrong time, and you only realize it once they're gone." He never forgot that. She smelled like cinnamon and cigarettes. She always carried a small notebook with her, full of unfinished poems and promises. They saw each other for 3 months. Not enough to call it love, but enough for everything else to feel dull in comparison. One night, on the rooftop of her apartment, she looked at him and asked, "Do you think we'll remember each other?" He smiled, not knowing what to say. She looked down at her hands, then said something he never expected. "I'm leaving. Next week. Going to New York. Art school. I thought I should tell you now, before this becomes harder." He just nodded, and that's the night he wrote the letter. "To the one I waited for," he read aloud again. "You left, and I told myself not to blame you. I told myself to be happy for you. But when I see women who wear their hair like yours, or when someone hums that same Jeff Buckley song, I feel the emptiness again. I don't hate you for leaving. I hate myself for not asking you to stay." He folded the letter slowly, hands shaking like they were remembering how to hold pain again. "I never mailed it," he whispered. "She gave me her address, and I just kept it. Like maybe not sending it would keep the story alive. But it didn't. It just made a ghost out of a girl who could have been real." He went back to the chest, picked up a small, dry flower pressed inside an old poetry book. Her handwriting was on the inside flap. "Don't become a museum of the people you've lost. Become a garden where they can bloom again." He closed his eyes. She had always said things like that. Half mystical, half heartbreak. Suddenly, something strange stirred in him. He stood up, put on his shoes, and stepped outside. It was raining, but for the first time in years, he walked without hunching his shoulders. He walked like someone who wasn't afraid to be seen in the daylight. Because somewhere in a corner of the city, he hoped maybe she still walked into bookstores. Maybe she still wore cinnamon perfume. Maybe she, too, once wrote a letter she never sent. He went to the bookstore. It was still there, older now, a little smaller, but still breathing. He walked in and asked for the bell jar. The owner handed him a copy and said, "We've had a few women come in asking for this lately. Something poetic about pain, I guess." He smiled. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it meant something. But the fact that the book was still there, on the shelf, like it had been waiting too, that was enough. Back home, he placed the letter back in the envelope. But this time, he didn't return it to the chest. He left it on the windowsill, facing outward, like a signal, like a lighthouse, like a whisper across time. "I waited for you," he read one last time. "And in some ways, I still do. But maybe now I wait not to find you, but to forgive myself for not trying harder." Do you ever sit in a quiet room and feel haunted by a version of yourself that never came to be? I do. Sometimes I see him, not in dreams, but in shadows, in reflections on rainy windows, in strangers who smile like they've already won. He walks taller than me, eyes clearer, shoulders straighter. He laughs louder, sleeps easier, and unlike me, he isn't scared of mirrors. That man is the man I never became. And tonight, I'm writing to him. "Dear stranger, I call you a stranger not because I don't know you, but because I've only imagined you. You are everything I once thought I would be by now. You don't live in this apartment that smells like forgotten time. You don't drink coffee at 2 a.m. because your mind won't shut up. You don't stare at the ceiling wondering if everyone else already figured it out. No, you figured it out, didn't you? You're the version of me that never gave up on that one dream I locked away in a box and labeled 'too late now.' You became the man who didn't settle, who didn't take that job just because it paid rent, who didn't say, "I'm fine 1,000 times" when he wasn't. Tell me something. Are you happy now? That night, I sat alone in my room with that letter unfinished. My fingers hovered above the page. What was I really trying to say? That I was jealous? Regretful? Angry at myself for letting that version of me slip away? I glanced around my apartment. Nothing in it screamed dreams came true. Bills piled near the fridge. A cracked clock that still ticked, just slightly offbeat. A mattress on the floor. And a shelf with 3 books I never finished. I wasn't always like this. Once a long time ago, I believed I would be something. I used to run to the window whenever it rained. I used to draw fire-breathing dragons in my notebooks during math class. I used to think love would fix everything. And then one day, I started growing up. I stopped drawing dragons. I stopped talking about dreams. I started laughing politely when people said, "Life isn't fair." I took jobs I didn't love, said yes when I wanted to scream no, and each time I folded, a part of that other version of me died. Maybe it wasn't all at once. Maybe it was in moments, small compromises, little fears, a dozen unopened emails that began with, "We regret to inform you." A memory came flooding in, one I hadn't thought about in years. It was the summer after high school. I was sitting on a rooftop with a friend named Jonah. We were both 17, and the world hadn't lied to us yet. "I think I'll be a filmmaker," I had said, staring at the stars. "Maybe I'll move to New York." "Hola," Jonah had laughed. "You're scared of taking the bus alone." "Not in the future," I told him. "Future me is fearless. Future me, that guy I'm writing to now. I got off that rooftop. I never moved to LA. I got a job as a data clerk. 1 year turned into 2, 2 into 5. And now here I am, midnight, in my underwear, holding a half-finished letter to a man who wears suits that fit and uses the word passion without irony. I folded the letter, not to throw it away, but because something inside me whispered, maybe I'm not too far gone. Maybe I don't need to become that man. Maybe I just need to stop running from the one I am. The next morning, something strange happened. I didn't hit snooze. I didn't open social media. I made my bed. That's all. I just made my bed. And for some reason, that felt like a win. Then I opened the window, and the sky was gold. The kind of gold that makes you forget the city's broken bones. The kind of gold that says, "Try again. Dear stranger, maybe I don't want to be you anymore. Maybe I just want to remember how it felt to dream again. Maybe I can still become someone else. Not perfect, not fearless, but honest. And maybe I don't need to become the man I never was. Maybe I just need to forgive the boy I once was and start from there." That was letter 2, the letter to the man I never became. I still don't have all the answers, but for the first time in years, I'm starting to ask better questions. And sometimes that's where healing begins. You ever meet someone who doesn't just walk into your life, but walks right through your soul? Yeah, this letter is about her. I never sent it, never had the courage to, because sometimes the scariest thing isn't losing someone. It's knowing they were never really yours to begin with. It was raining that day. Not one of those gentle, poetic drizzles they write about in novels. It was one of those brutal, sideways rains that feels like the sky itself is angry with you. And I was soaked, head to toe, standing on a sidewalk that smelled like wet dust and cigarettes. And then she walked by, yellow umbrella, a navy blue sweater that hung a little too big on her shoulders, and eyes that didn't look away when they met mine. We stood there, looking at each other for a second too long. Not in love. Not yet. Just curious. That's how she entered my life. Not with fireworks. Not with a spark. Just with stillness. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, just forgot my umbrella." She tilted hers slightly and said, "We can share till the next block." I should have said no. I don't do well with kindness. It makes me feel exposed. Seen. But I said yes. That short walk turned into a long conversation. A long conversation turned into a coffee. And that coffee turned into a routine. I didn't fall in love with her smile. I fell in love with her silences. She never tried to fill them. She let them breathe. Most people get uncomfortable when the talking stops. She didn't. She just sat there with me in the stillness. And somehow, that felt louder than all the noise I'd grown used to. "You never talk about your family," she said one night. I shrugged. "Not much to say. You ever miss them?" "Only when I'm quiet enough to remember they existed." She didn't press. That's the thing about her. She never asked questions she knew I wasn't ready to answer. Instead, she offered me pieces of herself. Slowly, carefully, like she was afraid I'd run. I didn't. Not then. There was this one night. We were on the rooftop of her apartment. The city lights looked like stars trying too hard. She was sitting cross-legged beside me, holding a cup of tea. "You know what scares me?" she asked. "What?" "That maybe some people aren't meant to stay. Maybe we just pass through each other." I didn't respond, because I was one of those people. I knew it then, and still, I stayed. We never called it love. It wasn't a relationship. There were no labels, no anniversaries, just late-night texts that started with "Are you up?" and ended with "I'm glad you are." But I remember the night I realized I'd lost her. Even before she left, she was laughing at something stupid I'd said. But her eyes, they weren't really laughing. They were scanning the room, looking for an exit. People leave long before they say goodbye. I wanted to tell her then, "I know you're pulling away." But instead, I joked. I always joked. That was my armor. And she always smiled. That was hers. Then one day, she said it. "I think we're in two different stories." I didn't ask her to stay. I couldn't, because deep down, I knew she was right. She wanted sunlight and beginnings. I was shadows and unfinished chapters. Here's the letter I wrote her, but never sent. "Dear you. You once said I was like a locked room, quiet, cold, and complicated. But you stayed anyway. You sat outside that room, every day, waiting for the door to open. And when it did, even just slightly, you never rushed in. You waited for me to invite you. And I never did. I don't know what hurt more, losing you or realizing I never really gave you anything to stay for. I want you to know, I saw everything. The way you noticed when I was pretending to be okay. The way you never interrupted my silences. The way you never once made me feel like I had to be someone else. You loved me in a way I didn't understand. And maybe that's why I let you go. Because some of us aren't afraid of being alone. We're afraid of being known. And you saw too much. I hope you find someone who doesn't flinch when you touch their heart. Someone who doesn't mistake your gentleness for weakness. Someone who stays. And if you ever think of me, know that I still think of you. Every time it rains. The boy who was almost ready. After she left, I kept going back to that same sidewalk. The one where it all began. Hoping maybe, just maybe, the rain would bring her back. It didn't, but it did bring something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. See, we spend so much of our lives trying to hold on. To people, to memories, to versions of ourselves that no longer exist. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let go. I never sent that letter, but tonight, I'm letting it out into the world. Not because I want her back, but because I want myself back. And maybe that's the beginning of healing. You ever walk past someone and wonder if your soul just brushed against theirs? Not because they smiled at you, not because they said anything, but because for one fleeting moment, it felt like the world stopped talking, and you both were the only ones still breathing. That's how it felt with her. She wasn't a friend. She wasn't a lover. She wasn't even an acquaintance. She was a stranger. And yet, here I am, years later, writing a letter to someone who probably never even knew my name. It was a rainy Thursday. I remember because I just quit my job that morning. Not out of courage, not out of rebellion, but out of something worse, numbness. I walked aimlessly through the city, soaked, tired, half alive. Coffee shops buzzed with noise and warmth I didn't feel part of. People moved in routines I no longer believed in. And then there she was, leaning against the railing of a small bookstore window, sipping from a mug too large for her hands. Her hair was tucked behind her ears, not in any stylish way, just natural. Her eyes? They weren't looking at anything. They were lost, just like mine. And in that moment, I thought, does she feel it too? I stood there longer than I should have. Long enough to look like a creep, but not long enough to do something brave. No hello, no smile, no introduction. I just walked away. But something inside me stirred. Not attraction, not desire, just curiosity. Curiosity about someone who looked as tired of the world as I was. The next day, I went back. I told myself it was coincidence, that I was just walking by. But it wasn't. She was there again. Same bookstore. Same window. This time reading. A real book. Not scrolling. Not pretending. And again I watched. Again I walked away. Over the next week, it became a routine. My feet, they just found their way there. Like my heart had drawn a map. Sometimes she'd be there. Sometimes not. But the days she was, I'd just stand across the street. Not stalking. Not scheming. Just silently being in the same world as her. It became enough. Enough to make me feel less invisible. Enough to make me imagine conversations that never happened. One day she looked up. Our eyes met. And for the first time, I didn't look away. Neither did she. 3 seconds. That's all. But 3 seconds felt like someone finally noticed I existed. And isn't that what most of us want? Not to be loved. Not even to be remembered. Just to be seen. I kept writing letters after that. To her. Not because I planned to give them. I didn't even know her name. But because she became a symbol. A symbol of possibility. Of what it might feel like to not feel broken. And in those letters, I wasn't the man buried in regret. I was the version of me I wanted to be. The man who could smile back. Speak up. Live. Dear stranger, I saw you again today. Your coat had a tear near the sleeve. I wondered if you ever noticed, or if you wore it like a badge of all the places you've been, all the things you've survived. You looked up for a moment, and the clouds behind you seemed to pause. Or maybe I just wanted them to. Thank you for existing. That was the first letter. There were others. Dozens. Sometimes poetic, sometimes messy, but always honest. I remember one particularly rough day. The kind where even breathing felt like a task. I just gotten off the phone with my father. Another argument. Or more like another silence that ended in a sigh. I was walking, headphones in, pretending the world didn't exist. And suddenly, there she was. Again, but not in the usual place. This time, on the other side of the street. Walking in my direction. No coffee. No book. Just her. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't stop. I didn't pretend to check my phone. I just kept walking. She walked too. And as we passed each other, she smiled. A real one. Tiny. Brief. But real. And I swear to you, it reached every part of me that had forgotten how to feel warm. I never saw her again. Maybe she moved. Maybe our paths simply diverged. Or maybe, just maybe, her job was done. She entered my story, not to stay, but to remind me that not all connections need a name. Some souls just pass by, like comets. Bright, brief, beautiful, and then gone. I still have her letters. Unsent, untouched, but never unloved. Sometimes I read them when I forget who I was trying to become. They remind me of the stranger who unknowingly saved me. Not with words, not with actions, but with presence. And that smile. They say grief carves the heart, but strangers? Strangers, they stitch it back. Even if only a thread. Even if only once. You know what's strange? I could forgive friends who left. Lovers who broke me. Strangers who never said sorry. But I never could forgive him. Not my father. And that silence between us became its own kind of inheritance. I've tried writing this letter more times than I can count. Each time, the paper remained blank. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. Too many wounds, too many years, too many unlived conversations. And yet, here I am, years after his death, trying again. Maybe because it's easier to speak when you know they'll never speak back. I was 8 when I realized my father didn't know how to love out loud. He wasn't the type to say, "I'm proud of you," or "I missed you," or even "How was your day?" He was the type who'd fix the broken light in your room, but never look you in the eyes. The kind of man who'd leave food on the table, but never ask if you were hungry. He was present, but never really there. Cut to a memory. Childhood. A boy sitting alone at a school play. One empty seat beside him. Lights dimming. That seat stayed empty for years. Every football match. Every school performance. Every quiet birthday. He always had a reason. Always something more important. And when I finally stopped inviting him, he never noticed. There were good days. I won't lie. Days where he'd sit with me in the garage, both of us fixing things in silence. No big talks, just the sound of tools and time passing. And somehow that was enough. Back then, Because when you grow up with emotional hunger, even crumbs feel like a meal. But as I got older, the distance widened. He didn't come to my graduation, didn't ask why I chose the career I did. He just said, "Hope you don't mess it up." Those words, they stayed with me. Not because they hurt, but because they were the only words I got. When Mom died, he didn't cry. Not at the funeral. Not after. He sat in his chair like a statue carved out of old grief. And that night, when I finally asked, "Do you feel anything at all?" he just said, "Feeling doesn't fix things," and walked away. Sound, paper unfolding, ink bleeding. Letter begins. "Dear Dad, I don't know how to begin this without sounding angry. But I am. Angry. Tired. Confused. I wanted so many things from you that I never got. A hug when I was scared. A well done when I tried. A conversation that wasn't about work or money or how to man up. You raised me to survive, but never to feel. And now I'm in my 30s, walking through life armored in your silence, unable to connect. Was that what you wanted? There's this thing I do now without meaning to.